You're still talking, I'm gonna stand here. No, I don't think so. First 30 minutes or so, section, question and answer.
Can you know that and down?
All right.
Just start right off.
Sure. All right. We good? Assuming everybody can hear us. All right, everybody. Well, good afternoon. Glad to be up here. If we're having these types of meetings, that means that the excitement is really getting close to starting up here. So this is our favorite time of these projects, when we get close to construction, when we actually start getting equipment out on the beach and see all of the stuff that takes years and years into planning come together and see it get executed. So my name is Ken Wilson. I'm the project manager, program manager for Coastal Protection Engineering. We're based out of Wilmington, North Carolina. So I've been working on these projects, I guess since the last one finished up in 2017. That was really the start of the planning for this project that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So we're going to give you a presentation here today. We'll walk through a little bit of background, a little bit of basics. We'll show you a lot of pictures and things like that of what the construction is going to look like. We'll talk about the design and how we came to, how much sand goes on each section. And then we'll talk a little bit about schedules, and then we can open it up to some question and answer. Whatever you guys are most interested in, we can talk about whatever. We got the right folks here today. So with that, I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to the project team. As I said, my name is Ken Wilson, but all the way down here on the right is Adam Priest. He works with me as well with Coastal Protection Engineering. Adam's actually the project engineer for all of this. He's the one that signed and sealed all of these plans and so forth. He and I worked on a lot of the concepts together over the years. But also today with us, I've got a couple of the folks from Weeks Marine. They're the contractor, the marine contractor, dredge contractor that'll be building this project. So here in the middle is James Ferguson, and this is Joe Mazzarelli. And James, I'm going to let you just give a quick intro as well.
Yeah, I'm the project manager. Joe's our East Coast operations manager. I've been with Weeks for about 15 or so years, ever since I got out of school, and I've done engineering, QC, production, project management work with them through the years, and worked quite a bit in North Carolina, mostly south of the Outer Banks, Wilmington, where we have a construction yard there, and Morehead City quite a bit. Not quite up this far north, but looking forward to it. I really like this area. So.
Cool. All right.
If anybody has any rental houses, we're in the market. So keep me in mind.
There you go. Rental houses. That third bullet up there, I did put our CPE field inspector. So we've got two guys that work for Adam and I down in Wilmington. Those two guys will be up here full time. They'll probably do 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Adam and I will be rotating in once a week, once every other week, something like that. So we'll be supervising things from Wilmington, but making regular trips up here as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about background information. Just make sure that we're all on the same page here. This is an overview picture that we show at a lot of our presentations, but this project, as important as it is to you all in Southern Shores, it's part of an even bigger project that includes the towns of Duck and Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills. All right, so this picture kind of frames it up and shows that starting all the way on the left-hand side or the north, the town of Ducks project, which is just north of the field research facility. And that's sort of a standalone project, but it all falls under this one contract that Dare County actually has with Weeks Marine. Oops, sorry about that. With Weeks Marine. And then there's cost sharing agreements in place between the towns and the county to make sure Weeks gets paid on time. And then as we move south, there's a gap in between where the town of Duck project is and where the northern boundary of Southern Shores. So all of Southern Shores is included in the project. All of Kitty Hawk is included in the project. And about 2.7 of 4.3 miles of Kill Devil Hills, or 4.5 miles of Kill Devil Hills, is also included in the project. So that's good when you get this long contiguous portion of a beach that actually helps the beach perform even better. The longer the beach, the slower we call it end losses, or how that sand moves off of the project. So we've got a really nice sized project, but this kind of frames it up. And then you also see that green blob, that unusual polygon out there offshore. That's the borrow site where all of the sand is going to come from for all 4 of these projects. That site, if you were to get in a boat right on the shoreline and drive straight offshore, it's about 5 to 6.5 miles offshore, depending on where you were going in the actual borrow area. And it's in about 50 or 60 feet of water. Okay. So all of the sand that's going to go on the beaches is going to come from that point, from that borrow site. And if you look down at the bottom, you see that, just kind of grand total of the project, we're talking about 12.1 miles of beach and about 2.64 million cubic yards of sand. All right, so let's talk briefly about the beach fill design. In Southern Shores, early on in the process, we talked about, all right, well, everybody says, well, do we need beach nourishment? And our question to them is, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? Because beach nourishment, it means different things to different people. So as we worked through with town council to figure out, okay, well, what are the priorities? Why would we need beach nourishment in the first place? The 3 goals that we came up with was, 1, a reasonable level of storm damage reduction. So if a storm hits the beach, we want to be able to protect from a certain level of storm, but it's kind of impossible to protect for every layer of, the 1,000-year storm, something like that. We can't protect for everything. It becomes cost prohibitive. But we use the same sort of design criteria that was used for these other projects, which is really something similar to Hurricane Isabel. So for those of you that were around during that storm, we looked at the impacts up and down the Outer Banks. And when we designed this project, it was designed so that if a Hurricane Isabel level event were to hit, that this beach would hold up, that we wouldn't lose any of those oceanfront houses. We wouldn't lose any oceanfront roads, things like that. The second goal was to mitigate long-term erosion. So every year, every storm that comes through, a little bit of sand is taken away. We want to keep up with that amount of sand that's moving off the beaches from year to year to year. And number 3 was we wanted to maintain a healthy beach that provides sufficient usable beach and supports shorebirds and sea turtle nesting habitat. And so in some areas of town, we would go and do our design analysis, and it would show that, if this storm were to hit today, there's enough sand in place to protect those houses back there or those roads back there. But during the tourist season, that beach is so narrow at high tide that, it's not desirable. It's not sufficient usable beach. And so we looked at, okay, well, how do we measure? How do we determine what that usable beach criteria is? And, what would we do to make sure that all of the beach has that quote unquote usable or sufficient usable beach? All right, so when we did that analysis, it actually ended up that the project is split into two different design segments. The easiest way to think about it is 4th Avenue. So everything south of 4th Avenue was designed based on what we would call like a classic advanced fill and design cross section. I'll show you an image that'll help you understand that. But essentially, there's an amount of sand that we've put onto the beach that when it's added to what's there already, we now have protection for that design storm, that Isabel level storm. But we know that as soon as we place that sand from year to year to year, we're going to lose some sand over time. So we put that design sand out there, and then in front of that design sand, we put even more sand. And that's sort of the sand we anticipate eroding away over a 4, 5, 6 year period during what we call a renourishment interval. Okay. So we have advanced fill and we have design cross section, and everything south of 4th Avenue was designed that way. When we looked at the design, or at that Isabel level storm, we said everything south of 4th Avenue actually would not hold up to that storm and does need some augmentation. North of 4th Avenue, when we did that analysis, it showed that what's there already would hold the line against that design Isabel storm. But those were the areas where the beach was very narrow during high tide, and that usable beach, or that goal number 3, really came into play. So north of 4th Avenue, we're basically adding enough sand to provide that usable level of beach, whereas south of 4th Avenue, it's more of those goals 1 and goal number 2, that reasonable level of storm damage reduction and mitigating long-term erosion. So picture's worth 1,000 words. I probably just said 1,000 words. I kind of talk a lot sometimes, but let's look at it in terms of pictures. So this would be a pre-project condition, just this cartoon that shows a house on the beach, not a whole lot of beach in front of it. We've got some waves out there. But when we build this project, we build it, we're going to build the beach very wide, okay? And that's a factor of just the construction logistics of these guys with the dredges. When they come in, you know, the real profile goes way out off into deep water, but they can't surgically put 6 inches of sand out here in 20 feet of water. They're going to pile up all this sand up here on the beach. And we know by the forces of nature that some of the sand is going to move offshore. Okay. So we place that sand. That's what it will look right after construction. Over the course of, 6 months, a year and a half, I'm sure it'll happen faster than a year and a half up here in the Outer Banks, probably closer to the six month scale on that. But a chunk of that sand by design is going to move offshore and be nourishing that outer portion of the beach. Okay. But what we're left with after this process that we call equilibration, which is just this movement of sand from what was built by a Weeks Marine off into the deeper water, after the project is equilibrated, what we have are these two different segments, what we talked about earlier, that advanced fill and that design beach. So these red arrows are pointing to that amount of sand that's there to hold the line for Isabel. The green arrows are pointing to that extra sand that's on top of it that we expect to erode away over a certain period of time. But in principle, at the end of the renourishment cycle, that advanced fill has gone away, but you still have that design level of protection intact. Right. All right. So we'll go back. So this little iteration that I'm showing right here, this is kind of the classic example. This is how the Duck and the Kill Double Hills project were designed. But I've changed the graphic a little bit for Southern Shores, because when we came in and we looked at the actual dune that was intact at Southern Shores, the dune has a really nice elevation to it, and the width is pretty well intact throughout the town of Southern Shores. So there wasn't a need to augment the dune the way there was when we came into Kill Double Hills and the Duck. We had to rebuild that dune in those projects. Whereas here, you've got a nice dune in place. And so all of the design beach is really looking at widening the beach in front of that dune that already exists. So I've modified the cartoon a little bit to kind of try to illustrate that. So as we go forward, the Southern Shores project, this would be after that advanced fill, and 5-6 years down the line, when the project looks like this, that would be the time to do a renourishment project. But if you notice the difference between this and this. A renourishment is only placing that material that was that sand that we expected to erode away over the 5 years. If the project performs the way that we expect it to, you don't have to place that design fill back again at the end of 5 years. And so for Duck and for Kitty Hawk and for Kildable Hills, that's where we are now. The first time in 2017, we built all of the design and all of the advanced fill. But this time around, we don't have to put all of that design fill on there. So their volumes, their cost of their projects this go round are much less than they were in 2017, because now we're just into a maintenance cycle. And we would expect the same thing for the town of Southern Shores as we move forward. This is just, those were kind of cartoons. These are actual images that from a different project that was built. This shows the construction template. That yellow shows the filled in area of what we asked the dredge contractor to actually build. All right, so they hit that template pretty well. And then over the course of about a year and a half, you see these are actual surveys that show that equilibration principle. So that's what we're trying to illustrate here. One other point is people say, like, you know, when the sand starts moving offshore, people that haven't paid attention to the project, they're going to be like, man, you know, half the sand you guys just paid for went into the ocean. This was such a waste of money. But what the real take home is in terms of this graphic right here is that before this project was built, when these waves come in from offshore, the principle of a wave is that it can only, depending on the height of the wave, it can only get into a certain amount of water before its weight will actually cause it to break. Okay. So you can't have these huge waves coming all the way into shore and breaking. They will break at a depth further offshore. And so what this arrow is showing us is that a wave that would come in before the project and break right here, after the project is built, that same wave is going to break, you know, here that 150 feet further offshore. So you're dissipating that wave energy further offshore. That's the idea of these projects. Okay. All right. So we talked about when the contractor comes in and they build this big wide beach. Everybody's going to want to know, well, how wide is that beach going to be? Well, I just talked a little bit about how it's split in two different segments. South of 4th Avenue, in the area where we're looking really at that goal number 1 and goal number 2, the average width of that beach when it's constructed, when Weeks is finished placing sand and they survey it in, is about 112 feet wide. Okay. So the way that we measure that is not from the toe of dune out to some distance, or not from the top of the dune, but all of the projects in the town of Southern Shores are going to be built at a flat elevation of +6 feet NAVD. Now that doesn't mean a whole lot to a whole lot of people, but if you go out on the beach today and you look at where that wet dry line is, where the water at the highest point comes up and leaves that line in the sand, that +6 foot NAVD contour is probably maybe a foot or two higher in elevation, maybe 10 or 15 feet further up on the beach than where that line is. And so that's where these guys are going to start placing that sand, and they're going to create a flat sand beach. I mean, it's going to be super flat when they're done building it. But the first time that a big storm comes in, that water will probably come up over top of what they've placed, and it will start shaping it to look more like the beach looks now. As far as like a natural slope or so forth. But when they first build it, it's going to look very, very flat. But that added flatness that they'll build south of 4th Avenue is about 112 feet on average. Yes, sir.
If I can, please.
Sure.
So
I need to drink
that
anyway.
elevation that you're describing, is that the same as mean high water?
So mean high water would be closer to 0. So this is 6 feet above mean high water.
Okay.
Yep. This is good.
What is the, so it's gonna be about 112, just for perspective, what is it currently?
So this is, the question was, what is it currently if we're going to go wider than 112 feet? It's going to be different on every single profile.
No, I understand, but you're talking about an average, so
But this is in addition to whatever is there now. The beach will be 112 feet wider than it is right now. So if you go down and you stand on that 6 foot contour, you find it, you stand on it, you, after this project, will be able to walk an extra 112 feet out at that same elevation before you start going down towards the water.
Yeah.
All right, so north of 4th Avenue, same thing, north of 4th Avenue, you can see the difference in the fill density. So there, that same measurement is only 52 feet, okay? But again, if you run those storm simulations, the area north of 4th Avenue has a lot of storm protection naturally as it is. So here we're really looking at widening that beach to create that usable beach width. All right, so here are some images of our actual plans. These are the plans that we provide to the dredgers to have them bid on it. These are the ones that have actually been bid on. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is probably starting sometime in the next week or so, they're going to start resurveying the first of the beaches that they're going to build. And when they get these, we call them pre-construction surveys. So these surveys, the design was based on 1,000-foot profiles. We have a profile that goes offshore every 1,000 feet. That's what these lines represent, these long lines. So we have a survey along this line and every 1,000 feet. They're going to come in soon and they're going to collect profiles every 500 feet, and they're going to provide us that data, and we're going to redesign this project or rebalance the sand. So we have kind of an upper limit of how much volume, but you guys live up here. You know that every time you go out to the beach, it looks a little bit different. So we are constantly working with moving goalposts here. And even when the project starts up, these guys will be, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when these guys start building the beach, the way that they get paid is that they will be surveying at that point every 100 feet down the beach on a profile, okay? So the specs say that 7 days before they start placing sand on the beach, they have to run these surveys for wherever they're going to be placing sand. They give us those surveys. We look at those surveys, and we may do another rebalance at that point in time just to make sure that we still are maintaining the budget, that we're still maintaining the amount of sand that we have up and down. And then those guys, they will resurvey it, and that's how they get paid. They get paid based on a computation of those two surveys, one that was done within a week before they place sand, and one that was done as soon as they finish placing sand. So if you look at the plans, just showing that this is starting in the south. So this is the boundary between Southern Shores and Kitty Hawk. You see a little bit of a stair step here. Now, in reality, that stair step won't exist. But what this is showing is that the volume of sand that's being placed on this profile for Southern Shores is a little less than the volume that's being placed for the Kitty Hawk project. And that just goes into what the goals of those two projects are. And since this profile is included in both, there's a little bit of a difference. But what will happen is there will be a short transition, and we'll design that transition once we have those intermediary profiles. But that transition will probably stretch somewhere over 200, 300 feet, depending on what the contractor is comfortable with, and it'll just kind of taper into that Southern Shores project there. But I'm back. All right. So this is the next set of plans as we're moving north, but this has an illustration on it that I can show you what some of these lines mean. So this landwardmost line is simply, that's where the plus 6 foot contour is. So that's where the actual beach fill will tie in. And one thing you could say about these is that if this contour holds up, that no construction is going to occur landward of that project. Now that doesn't mean the bulldozers won't be up there, or they might have pipes up there, or equipment will be up there. But as far as what they're building, everything that they're trying to build will be seaward of that line. And that's what this graph shows. So bullet number 1 shows the landward berm. Bullet number 2 shows that's the end of that flat sand beach that I was talking about. And at that point in time, it starts to slope down on a 1-on-15 slope down to wherever it intersects the existing condition. So this distance here, you can measure it on the cross sections, or you can measure it on this plan view, but that's how you know how wide that actual dry sand beach is, that number that I just quoted on average, that's 112. And then this would be where these plans show the limit of where the actual sand placement would be. Yes.
Explain what those, the dashed and dotted lines are too.
All right, so on the plans, we're showing the mean high water elevation. So when this survey was conducted, the mean high water, mean high water elevation was at this location, and the mean low water elevation was at this location. So it's just trying to show a frame of reference in terms of, the mean high water line, which is lower than that 0.6 or that 6 foot elevation that I mentioned earlier. When this survey was conducted, it was in this location. But when we're done with the project, the plus 6 foot contour will be all the way out here. All right. And so this just kind of follows the pattern through, showing a couple of landmarks here. Let's see. One thing that I wanted to point out here is you see another one of these little stair steps here. So one of the things that we looked at in some of our modeling and some of our design analysis was this area just south of where the split is between Ocean Boulevard and Duck Road. And then as we go up, I think that section goes up to about Dogwood, is that this area here, based on some of the modeling that we've done and some of the monitoring that we've done, looks like it may erode at a little bit of a higher rate than the rest of the beach south of there. So we're putting a little bit more of that advanced fill that we talked about earlier. The amount of fill we expect to erode away over a course of 5 years, we're putting a little bit higher density in that section. So there will be a little bit of a stair step when we get through that section. And that's what that's showing there. You see it coming back down. So this would be where that transition is, just south of Dogwood. The other thing that this green font is pointing out is that this is Trout Run here. This is going to be a staging area for and a construction access area. So, these plans are still in development with Weeks Marine, but this is one area that they've got permission to bring in trucks, unload heavy equipment, unload pipeline, store some things in that area for the time being as they're moving things off to the beach as they're unloading. But that's one of the approved access and staging areas. And then as we get further up north, here's that transition that I was talking about between, this is 4th Avenue. So everything north of here, now we're into that smaller fill where we're looking at the average of 52. These are the plans that, as I mentioned, that we use for bidding out the project. This actually shows Hillcrest Drive as still a staging area. We've been dealing with town staff. This is no longer going to be a staging area for Weeks Marine, but we're still in discussions about potentially using that temporary access if something comes up. But the staging area has been moved from Hillcrest down to Trout Run. All right, and then we get up to the boundary of Southern Shores and Duck, and you actually see here that the sand continues to go north. So this is what we call a taper. This area is here because when you build one of these projects, you're essentially creating a bulge in the shoreline. And anytime you create one of these artificial bulges in the shoreline, nature and these wave forces are going to have a tendency of trying to flatten that back out. So we know we are going to get these end losses off the side of the project, but through lots of practice in designing these projects, it's shown that if you build these tapers, you can reduce the speed at which you're losing material off the ends of these projects. So this feature here isn't really part of the design. It's more of a functional aspect to try to slow down the rate of sand moving off of the project. But that project, or that sand is being placed in the town of Duck, but all of that is part of the cost of the Southern Shores project. All right. These are cross sections. Just wanted to show you, again, this is kind of what, if you looked at those maps and you had a particular location you were looking for, you could look at and see these cross sections. Again, these cross sections are set up just like I showed in that one little diagram. These lines correspond to the lines on the plan views, and you can kind of look and each one of these has a stationing on it. You can kind of figure out the distance or the width of that flat sand beach at any given station. So they're all the way through. All right, let's talk real briefly. I talked about this big area offshore where all of the sand is going to come from. So the center of the project, if you look at just the center of the Southern Shores project to the northern portion of the Barrow area, that's about 11 statute miles. So every one of those dredges, every time they fill up their hopper, they will have to sail that distance. But one of the things I'll show you about Southern Shores is that the grain size on the beach at Southern Shores is a little bit coarser than some of the other beaches. And so the coarsest sand that we have in the Barrow area is actually located down in this corner of the Barrow area. So in fact, most of the sand or all of the sand from the Southern Shores project is going to come from this part of the Barrow area. So it's actually going to be a little more than 11 miles. But again, the Barrow area is located between 5 and 6.5 miles offshore in about 50 to 60 feet of water. All right, so this is the same Barrow area that provided most of the sand for the 2017 project. All the sand for Kitty Hawk and Killable Hills came from this project or from this Barrow area. We're pretty familiar with the quality of sand that's going to come out of that. But back before that project was built, lots of vibrocore samples taken out in that area. This is actually Adam and I when we got to do fun things like go out on boats and do field work and things like that. But this is the efforts of taking all these vibrochores, bring them back. It goes through all sorts of grain size analysis in the lab. And then we also do a lot of geophysical surveys where we're looking at the depths, we're looking at what's actually on the seafloor, and we're looking at these sub-bottom records of showing the different layers of sand and mud underneath of the seafloor. And we use all that data to come up with a determination of how much sand is there, what are the boundaries, how deep these guys are allowed to dig. And we come up with an analysis that shows that this particular sand is compatible with the sand that's actually on the beach. All right, so a lot of effort goes into that Barrow area design. This is just one more image that we have, or one more graphic from the plans. So this shows kind of a detailed view of that green polygon, that box that I showed, the Barrow area offshore. You can see there's a lot of twists and turns in this thing. There's some art that goes into this. We don't want to have so many jagged lines that it's impossible for these guys to dredge these areas. We try to make long tracks to where they can go through these on one trip through, on one track through. They can fill up their hopper dredge. We don't want them to have to go back and forth 6 times before they fill up the hopper. It just becomes more and more inefficient, drives the cost of the project up. So there are a lot of different principles that go into why this Barrow area looks the way that it does. And then one of the things you can see by these bold numbers and these arrows, each one of these boxes within the Barrow area is a limit to how deep these guys can dig. So if in one area we have a core that says, man, there's this layer of black clay at some elevation, we don't want them to dig that deep in this particular area. Well, we don't want to make that limit across the entire Barrow area. We lose an awful lot of sand for one layer of clay. So we can break these up into a couple of different cuts that allow us to get the most sand out of this one particular area. So all of these numbers, as I mentioned, if you went out there and dove on this, you'd be in 50 to 65 feet of water. It varies throughout, but each of these is a depth to which they can dredge. They can dig down to 65 feet anywhere in this box. They can dig down to 63 feet anywhere in this box. And then the one thing that this box is highlighted here, I mentioned earlier about the grain size in the town of Southern Shores. So all of the sand for the Southern Shores project is actually going to come out of this particular box. This is preferentially where we have the coarsest sand that matches up best with the town of Southern Shores native beach. All right. And then those red lines are going to actually show cross sections on the very next slide. If you were interested, this just shows these different depths. So that's showing how, in this box, they can dredge down to this depth, but once they get into this box, they can't dredge down to that depth. So that has some impacts on these guys and how they dredge as well. We try to minimize those stair steps, but in order to try to get the most sand out of this Barrow area, that's the way that ended up being designed. All right, so let's look at some construction photos in terms of what this is going to look like when these guys get ramped up. All right. So all of these pictures are pictures that we took during the 2017 project. This is a shot of the town of Duck. So what we've got here is this pipeline that's coming from offshore. They can talk a little bit more about how far offshore this pipeline goes, but it's essentially it goes out deep enough to where the dredges, as much water as they draw, can get as close as they can to shore. And then they've got a floating buoy out there that attaches to the ship. And then the ship is able to pump that sand and water mixture. We talk about pumping sand, but it's a lot more water that's going through that pipe than it is sand. It's about, I don't know, 87%, 82%. So it's a lot of water. And then as that water and sand comes out onto the beach, the water flows back into the ocean and the sand settles out. And that's what they've got all those bulldozers out there to start stacking that sand. But typical construction, that once they've got enough sand, they've got that flat, dry sand beach to work with, they're going to make a turn with that, with that pipeline, and they'll be storing extra pipe in here. They'll have some Connex boxes, their offices, trucks, equipment, bathrooms, fuel tanks, all this sort of thing. But they will keep this equipment into a certain confined distance. I think the permit allows them to spread that out over about 1,000 feet. And what you'll see is that area kind of contracts and then it expands, and it contracts and expands as they go down the beach. So at any given time, the people that have rented this house for the beach, that's what they're going to want to know. They're going to want to know, is our beach closed? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to work as much with them that, yes, at some point in time, somebody is going to have to either go a little bit north or a little bit south. But the speed at which this is moving, if the weather's good and the dredges are moving, ideally that closure of looking out and having construction equipment in front of you only lasts a couple of days. All right. So this is a pretty good diagram that's in this presentation, just showing, this is the boundary fence showing, that no pedestrians could go inside the construction. Again, you're looking at that subline coming on shore, pipelines stacked up, things like that. A lot of times they'll put a Y valve in here so that they can pump on this line or they can pump on this line, and they kind of rotate back and forth on that to build the project down the beach. When things first get started, what you might end up seeing on day one is, that pipe, that landing pipe is just going to be pumping out sand right here. And all they're doing right here is just trying to build a big enough platform that they can move all their equipment out there and start working. You can see this is in Duck in the very first day. They've got just their equipment squeezed in there just above that high tide line, waiting for that platform to be built so that they can move all their equipment down. This is something you might see in the beginning as well. So this is that pipe that stretches all the way offshore. These are some of the vessels that'll be used to kind of put that pipe in place, install that pipe. But this is what it'll look like when it's coming up onto shore. The boats will be pushing this pipeline up, and the bulldozers will pull it up into place, and then they'll get it positioned to where they want it to start pumping out sand. This is another shot that just kind of shows the initial platform being built in the town of Duck. This one, if it should play well, this was kind of a cool drone image that shows everything moving around. Oh, you got it. I'm going to let you do it. There you go. All right. So it's coming out on that bottom line there. And if you come out to those sites, that's typically what you're seeing when they're pumping out. One of the things with these hopper dredges is, there's not always going to be something coming out of that pipe. The different size hopper dredges, these guys can answer those questions, how long it takes to pump out, different size hopper dredges, but it'll be running for quite a while. And then when that hopper dredge leaves, they'll be waiting for the next one to pull in and hook up to that site. All right.
Whoever wants to do it.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, ma'am.
You said this is not the staging area, is that correct?
That's correct. This isn't the staging.
This is what's going to move every couple of days.
That's right.
Okay. So that guy, where you showed that is in front of somebody's rental house, which is the house we own.
Right.
all that stuff we're looking at right there is gonna continuously move.
Correct. And I'll show you a shot. One of this project's a little bit different because in the 2017 project, as I mentioned, the town of Duck and the town of Kildable Hills, we had to build those dunes that are out there now. We had to construct all of them. And so the way that the project sort of ended up working out was that at night, they would use the existing sand that was there to build the actual dune template. And by the time the sun came up, they had built the dune and they were really going to be working on building the flat sand beach. But one of the things that they were able to do was to put this barrier up at the top. And so that kind of allowed people to walk out their oceanfront house that they're renting and at least get up on top of this dune and feel like they were at the beach. And then at that point in time, they could walk a little bit north or a little bit south along the beach. They could see the beach, they could see what was going on out there. And that seemed to, people seemed to be a little bit, happier about that arrangement. But this project, we're not going to be building those dunes, and all those dunes now are vegetated, just like they are in Southern Shores. Like you wouldn't want to put a fence at the top of the dune and have people trampling along the top of the dune, knocking down all the grass in Southern Shores. So one of the things, once these guys get out there and situate, I mean, going into it, we didn't know that this is how it's going to work out. And it just takes a little bit of feel once things happen. But as I was showing, that they're not going to be building beach all the way up to the base of the dune. There will be a gap between where the dune is, where the toe of the dune is, and where where they're actually building that flat sand beach. So depending on how wide that is in different areas, like, maybe there are some circumstances where we can kind of minimize that, but I mean, we can't commit to that sort of thing this early on in the process until we get going. But I mean, these guys, they do this all the time in the summertime, all over the country. They know what a big deal it is that these people want to have as much access as possible. And, we'll all be working to try to minimize inconveniences for sure. These are the 3 dredges that they've talked about bringing onto site. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about capacity or anything like that. But the 2 bottom dredges, the RN Weeks and the BE Lindholm, they're actually in North Carolina right now working in a project down in Brunswick County. I don't know, the Magdalene's still in Texas or something.
It is, when we get to Southern Shores, it'll likely be a combination of the BE Lindholm on the bottom right and the Magdalene. The Magdalene's are our big newer dredge. It has like an 8,000 cubic yard capacity, which you don't really get that in the load. I mean, it's a percentage less than that generally, but you'll probably have a combination of those 2 at that time, which works well. The Magdalene will actually speed things up for you guys just because they hold a lot more, right? So they hold about twice as much as the other 2 smaller dredges, so, which will be a benefit by the time we get up here with the longer sailing distances.
Cool. All right. These are a couple of pictures that I put in there just for perspective. So this is from the 2017 project. Those dredges are hooked up to that pump out station. So this is about as close as you would expect those dredges to get to shore. I mean, it's definitely gonna open people's eyes. They're not going to be used to seeing a ship that big, that close to shore. But this just gives you a little bit of perspective of, what those ships look like hooked up to the pump out stations. This is another little video, not a whole lot to show, but this is just kind of what it looks like sitting out there. So it's hooked up. It's hooked up to this line is a floating line, but it goes down to the subline that's laying on the seafloor, and then it's going all the way up to the beach. But this material, the sand is being re-slurried and pumped through the ship into this floating pipe and then all the way up to shore. All right. Another thing that's in the specs is these sand ramps. So, even when the beach is opened up, there may be a pipeline along portions of that beach where people will actually be out there. And in order to be able to access the ocean, get across those pipes, I mean, they're big pipes. They're hard to climb over, and they don't really want you climbing over them either. But there'll be sand ramps, every so often, so that folks can move over those, and they do a real good job of maintaining those, making sure that there's plenty of access over those.
Is there any danger of people falling over those pipes in the water?
No, because where that pipe comes up onto shore, that area will all be, well, no, that's not true. Typically you guys are, so like if the subline is over here and it's going down the beach and your construction area is over here, in terms of that subline out there, usually they're pretty well marked. And I mean, in the past in 2017, I mean, the lifeguards were aware of them, trying to keep people. I mean, they say, keep away.
There'll be signage and lights at them, but there will be a pipe that extends out into the water, yes.
All right, so you've seen this graphic before, but what I want to show again is this idea of tying in, not to the dune, or not up into the dune or building new dune, but this flat sand beach that kind of ties in at this plus 6 foot contour. So what that actually looks like on the beach is, again, this is probably about the plus 6 foot contour for this particular for this particular picture, and there's a gap between the toe of dune. This is up in Duck, just north of the FRF. This was shortly after Christmas. They had all their Christmas trees up there trying to collect some sand. But so there is this distance between that plus 6 foot contour, and that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of sand, or in terms of access or being able to walk behind the project. But again, that's going to be something that until they're up here and set up, whether or not that can or can't happen. But the reason that I show you this picture is that part of the project is also the installation of sand fencing. And so the dry sand beach will go from this line, pushing that contour out offshore, 112 feet, as we talked about. But the sand fencing will go right at the toe of the dune, all the way along that project area, and it'll be installed. That's part of Week's contract. So what we're looking to do is anywhere where we've got some scarping or some scarping of the dune, is to get a little bit of sand building up in those areas and capture some of that sand, actually increase the size of the dune a little bit at the base, even without having to mechanically place it there as the sand starts blowing around in the fall. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
You said that was in December? That was at Christmas?
That's in Duck, but that would have been like January, February, something like that.
So after it was nourished, the dune looked like that?
Right. So this is like 4 years after that project was constructed. Remember, I talked about how a longer project performs much better. Well, one of the things we're struggling with in Duck is that project is only like 1.6 miles long, and it has lost. Not only did it lose that advanced fill that we talked about, but it has lost some of the design beach as well. So I think I should have grabbed those numbers. The project still has like 60% of the sand that was placed there, something like that. But portions of that dune have been eroded away in Duck, especially on the southern part. This is pretty close to the FRF. As you get further and further north, away from the field research facility, the pier, there's less and less of the scarping. But that's a good point. They have lost some of that design in the town of Duck, and most of that is attributed to the fact that project is so short. All right, almost done. Just talk a little bit. I talked a little bit about the payment for the project and how these guys get paid, but in terms of this being a part of the bigger project, so when we bid this project, there's a cost for the mobilization, demobilization. They have to have performance bonds and payment bonds and all that sort of stuff. They have to do certain surveys of the borrow area. All of that stuff is lumped together, and the 4 towns split that cost based on the volume of sand going on the beach. So if Southern Shores volume, I don't know off the top of my head, if Southern Shores is 28% of the total volume, you pay 28% of that cost. And then each town has its own unit cost for how much sand goes on the beach. So whatever Southern Shores unit cost is, that's when we talked about doing those surveys 7 days before they place sand. and right after they're done placing sand, we just compute that volume, and whatever your unit cost is, you're paying that amount of sand times, I think it's $8.50 for the town of Southern Shores. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then we do have in place some things that, like I said, sand fencing is included, post-construction surveys that'll be done after the project is completely built. Weeks Marine, they'll have surveyors up here, so we're going to have them do those first baseline surveys within 2 weeks of the project being constructed. So 2 weeks after the project constructed, that survey is done, and then that's the survey that we compare every year when we do our annual monitoring to see, how well the project is performed. What is the rate of change of the sand over time? But we do have some discretionary bid items in there. If things come up just from past experience, if we need those types of things, those costs, those rates are already understood. So that's just like best practices, good things to keep in contact or in context. This shows just what we're trying to illustrate is we talked about how much sand they get paid, but they also have to be really careful about when we talk about this plus 6 foot contour that they have to build. If they go out there and they do a sloppy job and they place a whole bunch of sand above these tolerances, I believe these tolerances are 1/2 foot. So they can build the beach 1/2 foot higher or 1/2 foot lower as they go. But if they go above that 1/2 foot, they actually would not get paid for that additional sand that they placed out there that's out of tolerance. So that's why those surveys are real important. The other thing, when you think about a 1/2 foot high or a 1/2 foot low, you might say, well, they want to get paid for as much sand as they possibly can. What if they build the whole entire project a 1/2 foot higher? Well, that's why we're constantly in contact with them about, what are those levels? And if it looks like, they're a little bit higher, then we may have to adjust the template as we go to make sure that we're balancing that total amount of volume all the way down the beach. And those are all things that get worked out as we go. Again, this is pretty common practice. They're used to dealing with these types of specs. A couple of types of monitoring that are going to have to be done for the project. There's a lot of turtle monitoring that's going to be done. So there's one group that will drive the beach as they typically do in the morning. These guys are allowed to work inside of their confined area, but if for some reason a truck has to go out or a piece of heavy equipment has to go outside of their construction area at night, there are monitors in the construction area, turtle monitors, that would actually have to escort them out if they have to go outside of the area to make sure that there aren't nests that they might drive over that haven't been spotted. And then in the morning, the crews go out there and do the whole beach, and then they give these guys the all clear. And at that point in time in the day, they can take their equipment wherever they need to take it. There's also somebody that will sit with the construction folks at night from sun up to sundown. If a turtle comes up into that project area, they will see that action. The construction guys will see it as well, but they'll have to stop that. Turn the lights off, let that turtle, if it's going to come up, lay its eggs. If it actually does lay a nest in that area, there are people on standby that can come in and relocate that nest. Or even if it's not in that construction area, if it's in a place where that nest could be impacted, maybe say it's, a 1/2 mile down the beach, but they know, in 2 weeks they're going to be down there. They will end up taking that nest and relocating it to another area that wouldn't be impacted. But that's why it's important. It's important to do that monitoring all the time, because the sooner you can relocate that nest and get it, resituated, the better chance of those turtles surviving. All right. And then one other type of monitoring. This is a little bit new for this project. In the 2017 project, this was not required. But we've got to look at, they call it benthic monitoring. So it's basically like the clams and the worms and the mole crabs and all this stuff that's in that sand on the beach. Lots of studies have been done to show how this stuff comes back over time. As the sand is being laid out, some of this stuff can migrate out of the area. Some of it does get smothered up, but within a year or two, that those animals come back and recolonize those areas. In fact, Adam and I live down around Wrightsville Beach, Carolina Beach, and they re-nourish those beaches every 3 years. And you go down with your kids, and if it's right after nourishment, like you're digging, and they don't find anything, but you go back the next year and like they're everywhere. So it is a little bit cyclical, but they want some monitoring on this so that we can document the changes that occurred during the project. Let's see. So we're at schedule, about to wrap this up. So right now, as it stands, and all of this is up for potential changes as we get closer and closer to the project. But the current information we have is that the Kitty Hawk project will be the first project that starts sometime in early June. That project is about the same amount of sand as Southern Shores. They're anticipating about 40 days to complete that. Good weather, good equipment functionality. So they would finish that up around mid-July. At that point in time, they would move over to Kill Double Hills. That would finish up sometime around mid-August. That's a little bit less volume. And then they move over to Southern Shores. So the dates that we have right now, these are the dates that are up on the county's website as well. Talks about mid-August, the end of mid-August to mid-September, about 40 days. But we will constantly be updating that once the project starts. Once we start working through the other towns, all of those dates will, they'll constantly be in flux, and the folks are just directed to go to those websites to get the latest and greatest information. And then the plan right now is to do duck at the end of the project.
You know if they're going to be going north to south or south to north?
North to south, south to north,
I
in terms of like
believe
in Southern Shores.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go both ways, because I think there's 3 subline landings right now laid out for Southern Shores. So once you come on the beach, on any given pipeline, you would go south and north at that spot and then move the line down, or we'd actually already have another line in place and then do the same thing from that
But
location.
if you're moving the line down, is it moving south or north?
Where the pipeline comes onto the beach, we would go each direction from that location along the beach to the south and the north. And then the pipeline that comes in from offshore would move down the beach and then go each way again.
Which way?
Which way does it move
I guess what you're
down?
saying is if you start at the hill, are you gonna start at the hill, or are you gonna
that's-
start at the
that's
split? I think
sublines.
it's really what you're saying is that maybe.
Start south and move north
So you go
would
south.
be the way to go, because we'll already be down on that end. We would more or less hopscotch our way up closer to duck, and then we'll end up that way.
Just out of curiosity, why is it that you would do Kitty Hawk before you would do Kill Double Hills and not just go up one after another?
It's a good question. I think we estimated it with different dredges doing different portions of the job, and that's how it was planned out originally.
But yeah, one of the things that we did last time, you can see what James was saying was when that pipeline comes up, they're going to pump as far as they can in this direction. And then at some point in time, it will become inefficient to pump that much further. It's closer to go down to the next one. And so what happens is they flip it. They go pumping south and they're going to flip to north, but we'll be trying to give people, in those daily updates, those weekly updates, are we getting close to flipping the pipe, or, we're going to do it in the next day. It's anticipated in the next couple of days that they're going to flip the pipe, because that'll change dramatically of where that construction area is. It's not just going to continually move in this direction. It's going to move down to here, and then overnight it's going to jump to here and start moving up this way. And then when they're done with as far as they can pump on that one pipeline, then they're going to move to another pipe, another pump out. So it does shift around, and we'll be working to try to give folks as much, anticipated understanding of when those shifts happen and where they're going to go to next. Yes, ma'am. So all of this occurs 24 hours a day. Those cycles through the dredges are constantly going.
Is it noisy?
I mean, in that construction zone, like if you were on one of those oceanfront houses, you're going to hear the backup alarms. That's the noisiest thing that you're going to hear on the bulldozers. The beep, beep, beep. Yeah. So that's what you'll hear. But that's what we're used to people saying. You can hear those, but yes, ma'am.
I live beside the town.
Okay.
So what do I expect?
You want to talk a little bit about that? She said she lives next to the trout run, the place we saw today, and just like in general of days or what would be there and how long it lasts and what that looks like.
Generally speaking, for the most part, we'll try to bring stuff from Kitty Hawk through the pier for the most part, whatever we can get through. So the beginning of Southern Shores, we'll probably have a little flurry of equipment coming in, 2 or 3 days of kind of heavier traffic. And then throughout the time that we're in Southern Shores, we'll have some equipment staged at that access.
I mean, if it's 24/7, is it?
Well, 24/7, we may be working way down the beach away from that area, but we would still have equipment at Trout Run. So we would bring the stuff in initially, and then when we leave to go out, there'll probably be a week or two of heavy traffic, leaving out of that area. During the rest of the time, I mean, it would actually probably be open. We would just have stuff staged along that area.
And also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, like the things that he's talking about bringing in and unloading, I mean, all that stuff is coming on trucks. A lot of it's, oversized loads. So, I mean, they're not making deliveries of pipe at 2:00 in the morning. I mean, all that stuff is happening.
That's right.
During daylight hours.
Right. So all any kind of deliveries going in and out daylight, normal business hours, going in and out of there. And then the 24 hours a day, that could be, a mile down the beach.
That's just in that area that's fenced off, that's constantly moving. That's where the 24-hour all the time there's action going on in those.
That's right.
The second question is, August and September is probably our worst and most active hurricane season. So how do you all gather up all of that?
Sure. No, I mean, that's all figured into their schedule as well. The last project in 2017, it was a different contractor they were working through, but I think in the whole month of September, I think they worked like 4 days or something. And they finally finished up in the first 2 weeks of October. So we've talked about that. They're well aware of it. They've got commitments with where these dredges are now and the projects they have to get built. But I know more than me, more than you, these guys want to finish up as much before September as possible.
A question I'm going to ask often is, are there any attempts around these dredges to protect ocean life, wildlife, fish, dolphins?
Sure. So the question was, is there something that's done, procedures around the dredges that need to be done to protect turtles and wildlife and those types of things? There's a lot of environmental permitting and review that goes into these projects. So there are actual spotters on all of these dredges. They'll have trained, I don't know if it's National Marine Fisheries Service certifies those guys or gals as well. But they'll be on these dredges literally looking for endangered species or their whales or their turtles within a certain distance. And there are procedures that if that happens, what they have to do. It's not always like shut down, turn all the motors off. It's, if this guy's over there, we need to be over here. We need to stay a certain distance away. And all that stuff is documented. There's also, there will be a trawling boat. It's sort of like a shrimping boat, but the nets are specifically designed to where they can safely, they're basically dragging along the bottom and they're trying to move sea turtles that might be out there on the bottom out of the way. But they can, if they approach them correctly, they can actually catch these sea turtles and they'll pick them up onto the deck of the boat and they move them to a different spot further away from where the dredges are operating. But these trawlers work in front of these dredges to kind of clear it out. And that's something that National Marine Fisheries Service believes is, it's a minimization technique to make sure that they don't actually get sucked up into one of these dredges, that you're basically moving them off. Or if they don't move away with, once those nets hit them, if they actually pick them up. But that procedure is very detailed. They can only be in the water for a certain amount of time. They can't just drag these nets all day long. They have to pick them up and check them every 20 or 30 minutes or something like that. But in the last project in 2017, they relocated the trawlers that were doing that. They relocated, I don't know, like more than 70 or 80 turtles during the project.
Any of them hurt?
No, ma'am. They have lots of, they have to take pictures of every one of them. They actually tag them. They'll put tags on the ones that they do. They have a sensor that they can scan to see if that turtle had ever been tagged in the past. So they get all kinds of information from that point. But I mean, there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with it and what they have to do with those. So a lot of effort goes into that sort of operation.
Could you maybe give Cliff a link where residents could get that kind of information?
Sure.
If you get it to Cliff, maybe.
Would there be any dune restoration as far as, grass plantings and the like? You see any of that? And then that you had mentioned that the dune, for the most part, which is all southern shores, is in very good shape, unlike what you face with the duck.
Right. So I don't know specifically about planting what the town has talked about at this point in time, whether the town is looking to do something or it will be left up to property owners. But again, like
So that's not under your purview.
correct. So we are, the sand fencing is part of this contract. It will go in, but I mean, you probably want to see how that holds up over the first winter, how much of that sand fencing gets put in. Typically, if you plant that stuff next to sand fencing, there's a good chance you can, it'll get covered up. So, with that sand fencing and all of that flat, dry sand beach, I mean, it's amazing how much of that sand will blow around once the fall and winter comes around. So, the best guidance is kind of, let's see, and the grass that's already on the dune right now, that will be catching a lot of sand as well. So let's see. Happy to take, I think I'm pretty much there as far as what I had, but happy to answer questions. So moving forward after the project is constructed, like I said, we'll have those pre-construction surveys 6 weeks prior to construction. So, any day now, they will probably start those first couple of towns doing those pre-construction surveys. The construction for this project, tentative 40 days, mid-August to mid-September. And then townwide monitoring, initial post-construction survey, 2 weeks following completion of the sand placement. That's what I was talking about. So part of their surveyor's contract is that as soon as the town of Southern Shores Beach is done, they'll do that initial baseline survey, and that'll lock in the condition, and that'll be what we compare every year's survey to. How much sand has moved out, has moved in since that original baseline survey. And then let's see, continue annual monitoring for the duration between the projects. But right now the project was designed with a 5-year design life for that advanced fill. So, but yeah, there's contact information. And like I said, happy to go back to some of those pictures. You can ask questions of these guys as well. What else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, we drove all the way from DC for your meeting and we were late. So you may have already covered this.
No, that's okay.
We live on 4th Avenue, and we've been curious through this whole thing about, what's the deal between that being the line of demarcation? What does that mean? If you've already answered that.
No, it's okay. We talked a little bit about the difference between the north and the south, but in terms of how we came up with that particular line, where we cut it off. So there's a model that we use called S-Beach, and it's basically a model that allows us to simulate a storm hitting the beach and whether or not there would be any impacts to the structures, behind the dune or behind the beach. And so when we run that analysis, some of the last structures that would potentially be impacted are right in that area where you guys are. It's that last property just south of 4th Avenue. So what we do is we create what we call an impact line.
That's the highest dune on the shore in Southern Shores. Number 3, 4th Avenue. It was the first house on the ocean there, and then it was built by a man in the Army Corps of Engineers who was working at the research pier. So That is in fact the highest unit.
I mean, I believe it's not always about like the simple elevation. It really is about the volume. So maybe as you move offshore, we talked a little bit about how, depending on elevations, waves break at a certain elevation. And if you can move sand offshore, that wave breaks further offshore. Maybe on those particular profiles, it's a little bit steeper out there as you get under the water. But for whatever reason, when we run the models and we plot that impact line and we look at where that impact line intersects certain structures that are on the beach, that's how we determine how far north or south we would have to take the project. And
Well, there's a difference in the description of the depth and the cubic feet and depth from shore. I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, it's okay.
But there's a distinction between, and everything bears on Fourth Avenue. It says north of Fourth Avenue, X number of cubic feet deep, X number of cubic feet.
Correct.
Out and south. So we keep wondering, are we in this little no man's land? And what, is there a step? I mean, what is it?
There is a step, and we did talk a little bit about that as well. So where that, let me go to this.
I didn't want to second that, so the question I had when you were at that part, where she was talking about, is what's it gonna look like? And I think that's kind of what you're saying
Yeah, I
too.
mean, is there literally a step?
So, because there is a difference then, am I gonna be walking along and I have to go up and down or around?
Yeah, we can have up and down in front of our house.
No. So,
1,000 feet in duck.
So it's a matter of between 4th Street. That's, I'm not talking about the tape. I'm talking about-
okay.
Well, it's both.
so this,
So there'll be a.
this is,
Yes,
exactly, yeah, right there.
But it'll.
It's a step.
Yeah.
Sand moves.
I guess you're saying it's gonna be tied in, so there won't be any abrupt angles to it, it'll all tie in and taper.
It'd be really
Tapering
hard.
something, like a concrete or something, won't just have won't be a step.
yeah, and it will taper in. So like what's shown in this drawing is kind of what we're talking about. It's a difference in the actual width of that dry sand beach, of that 6-foot platform. But this is just a drawing that was shown because all we have at this point in time are 1,000-foot profiles. When they actually build the project, they will have a profile every 100 feet. So they'll have one here, every 100 feet down. And we will use those 100-foot profiles to design, to tell them, okay, that there's not going to be a stair step there. You're going to run this line on a gentle slope down this way on 200 or 300 feet down the beach. So if you were walking out there, you'd be walking down the 6-foot contour and then you start walking this way a little bit. But it would be a gentle, you probably wouldn't even see it if you were out there. You might see it for a day or two, but within a week, it's going to start moving around so much that you won't be able to see, it's not going to be a dramatic cutoff right there.
Thank you.
Like a line in the sand, literally.
Can I ask your wonderful week's contract
Sure.
guys, just top 1 or 2 things that keep them awake at night when they do these projects? What are the 1 or 2 things that they just worry the most about typically when they do some of these projects?
So for the mayor asked Weeks Marine, what are the top couple of things that they would worry most about on these types of projects?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I always say my biggest one would be, public safety type things, people getting into the work area, stuff like that. Mob and demo is always, difficult for us for the same reasons, traffic control, things like that. But public in the area, I know it's a busy time of year, extra busy. We will be a little bit later in the season, at Southern Shores, but that would be my number one.
Do you provide literature that can be given to renters about, or detailed signs at the site?
What I was gonna say is, we have some contacts with residents here and also property managers here. So one of the things that I see the town doing is taking the role of communicating the public safety aspect of this project. And we will have to say it 100,000 times. So we get that. Yeah, we get that. And we're gonna try to do the best that we can. Although I will say, everyone's personally responsible for their own personal safety. So, you can only communicate so much. Ultimately, it's the individual's responsibility. These guys are gonna do what they can do. We'll communicate all that we can, but ultimately, it's everyone's individual responsibility to just try to stay as safe as they can.
And the website has got a lot of information on there. Yeah, if you go on the Southern Shore website, just for beach church. And that's gonna be updated.
Every couple of days, we'll have a map that shows progress and which direction we're going. And you can kind of calculate, if you're 1,000 feet up the beach and you're moving, at X amount of feet at a time, you can kind of figure out about what time or day would be in front of you.
When you take a vacation. Does town management have a copy of the EIS communication?
Yeah, so he had mentioned, does town management have a copy of the EIS? So there isn't an EIS for this project. There's an environmental assessment. It's a similar document. But yeah, there is an EA and the town has access to that.
We feel your pain. We did that for a living.
Will these surveys be done on land or on the sea?
That's a real good question. So they're done both. So the pre-construction surveys that we talked about at 500-foot spacings, those will definitely be done with a surveyor that'll be up on the beach that you could walk out into the ocean. And it will also be done by a boat that comes in. And usually the quality control on that is that you have to get 50 feet of overlap. So either the swimmer has to go really far out or the boat on preferably a calm day has to get really far in, and you have 50 feet of overlap between those two. Sometimes, when they're doing those 100-foot spaced profiles for payment, in order for them to get, once the project is actually built, in order for that surveyor to get out there to where the slope ties into the existing depth, sometimes they can do that with just waiting depth surveys. I guess they don't always need a boat to get out to that depth, but it is like kind of a tag team. Like there are surveyors out there on the water and there's folks up on the land. What else? You got anything?
Good job.
Did I say anything that you guys are like,
No,
crazy?
I was spot on.
I wish you wouldn't have said that. I don't know about all that.
No, it was really good. I think the pictures and all that are just very, very similar to what we'll have. Everything you saw is, I know some of that was the past project, but we'll look extremely similar to that.
All right, thanks. Yeah. I mean, communication was big key in that 2017 project, and all the towns in the county be following a very similar model, like pushing out as much information as we possibly can. And things will change. That's the name of the game I talked about earlier. We're constantly looking at moving goalposts, but we will continue to push out as much information as possible so that it's transparent. Everybody understands why things change or when they're going to change, how we're going to make those decisions. So.
And a lot of that communication too is going to be from Dare County Central, because they in fact are the ultimate coordinator of all of these projects. And so Dorothy Toolin is their public information officer, and Dorothy's going to have regular, updated videos and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's going to be a very busy summer in Dare County in so many ways.
So
Sure.
what's the thing that keeps you up at night about this?
Nothing.
Yeah, girl.
Wow.
I got way other
That's
things
what
to
I
worry
was
about. But I will tell you this, this truly is a partnership, because we're funding this with the MSCs that we set up, but also we're funding it with town money, so we have a lot of skin in this game, so, I'm making a joke, but, and it's the biggest thing that the town has ever done, no doubt, in terms of capital, outlay. But, that's why we hire the big guns, that's why we have the people that know what they're doing. So I'm sure my phone will be busy, my email will be busy, and that's fine, y'all call me, email me, that's fine, feel free. If I don't know the answer, I got something to find out. But thanks, everybody, very much for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Yes. Good job, fellas. Joe.
Good job, man.
Excellent.